Hi there, Doug from TauStats, continuing our discussion of how emission is distributed amongst the Bittensor network. In this video, we're going to do a deep dive of how tau is distributed to validators and delegates, those that have staked tau to the validators. We've got an overview video that walks through the whole process, and then a bunch of deep dives. One on how tau is distributed among subnets. We've talked about miners, and so this is the last in the series where we talk about validators and delegates. From a high level, just as the quick start through, every 12 seconds, there's a block emitted from the network, and that creates one tau. And that tau is then split across to every single participant of the network. The first split is across the 32 subnets, which we show here as a pie chart. And then from that, it's split from each subnet to the subnet owners, the validators, the miners, and then those that delegate to the validators. And so that's where we're going to go today. But after it's split to the subnets, inside the subnet, 18% goes to the subnet owner, 41% to the miners, and 41% to the folks we're talking about today, the validators and the delegates. Here's what we're looking at in TauStats. This is a metagraph chart, and I've sorted it by dividends. And so by dividends, we're going to see only the validators at the top of the screen. And you can see here, dividends is basically directly proportional to the amount of stake. This can vary based on the V-trust for each of the validators, but in general, it's stake that really pushes this dividends number. And we'll get into the math behind that in just a second. But the first thing you're going to look at is the dividends. Essentially, the way this math works is there's a mathematical formula, and that takes your trust of the validator and converts that into dividends. For miners, the incentive adds up to 1 across all of the different miners. Dividends is that column for the validators. So the dividends is going to add up to 1 across all of the validators. There are not as many validators, so this number is a lot larger. And while V-trust does play a role in this, if you have a low V-trust, your dividends will be lower. The biggest factor in determining your dividend is the amount of tau that is staked to the validator. So this first validator with 1.3 million, it gets about 25% of the dividends. And then the next few are all in that mid 6 figures, and they're all about 10%. And then it slowly goes down from there. When you're a validator, a lot of the subnets now require that you have at least 20,000. Some are, I think I now have heard, are 25,000 tau to begin validating. Now, if you think about that, that makes sense because you have like 60 times less dividend than some of these other validators, right? 1.3 down to 20,000. That's a huge jump. And so having validators with like 50 tau or 100 tau just doesn't make sense anymore. So they really, to be successful as a validator, you need to have that 20 to 25 or more thousand tau staked to your account. To get the emission for each of the validators, you just take the dividends times the amount of tau that's going to be distributed to the validators, right? So this one will get 25%, this one will get 11, this one will get 10% of the tau that this sub has been deemed to this subnet for the validators. I discussed this in the miner video, but this emission value is the emission per epoch. So that's 360 blocks. And the reason that we do that at TauStats is that the emission numbers are really small. And by multiplying it by 360, we get numbers that are, that we can comprehend as people in our brains. If you use the emission from the command line, you're going to get the emission per block, but it's in rho, which is 1/1000th of a tau. It makes the numbers big, and now you've got commas in it instead of like decimals, but it's just another way to visualize the number. The numbers are the same, it's just being presented in a different scale. If we continue scrolling across the metagraph for a subnet, I just flipped it down here so it all fits on one screen. We can see the IP, we can see the hotkey, the cold key, and then we can see the daily tau. And this daily tau is the emission times 20. There are 20 epochs in a day, And this is actually really nice math, right? 1.05 times 20 gives you 21. I can do that math almost in my head. And then the daily dollar is just this number times whatever the active live price of tau is at that given instant that the page is generated. This total value is the stake times the value of the tau. So that's saying how much has for validators, this is showing how much the dollar value of the tau that has been staked or delegated to that validator. When you look at this, it looks like there's a lot of money going to all of the validators. But remember, when you stake tau, you get proceeds. You get a percentage of the tau. So this doesn't go to the validator. This is split between the validator and all of the stakeholders. Let's go through a really simple example of that. As you can imagine, most validators probably have thousands or hundreds at the very least of delegates. But here I'm giving an example of 7. And in this case, I'm showing the amount of tau staked to from each one of these stakeholders. And to figure out the split, you just take a weighted average, right? What's the percentage of the tau that stakeholder 1 has placed on this validator? And then you can figure out how much tau is distributed to that row. The validator takes 18% of that. That is the validator's take. They get 18% of that total rewards per day. And then the remaining 82% is distributed to the stakeholders. So in this case, if you were a validator, you would sum up this column and that'd be how much you get. This stakeholder, every single tau that's emitted will get 0.0021 tau. And so that's how you work out that math. Now, if you have staked tau and you want to see how this looks for your hotkey, you can see that in tau stats as well. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to search at the top of the page with your hotkey. And that's going to give you a page where if you scroll down, this is the delegation. And so this is just one random hotkey that I found. And you can see that they had at one point 700-ish tau to Rizzo. And then in the last couple of days, they went and put 380 of it to Roundtable. So they're splitting it up. So you can see this. You can see a daily change by downloading the CSV. We're working on adding this reporting to the actual website. That's coming soon. But for right now, the CSV will show you the daily change. So it'll actually show you how much you earned in those emissions every single day. This will get better on the website, but in tau stats, you can see that live right now. So again, real quick deep dive into how the emissions from each tau are distributed through the subnets to the validators and then to the delegates of each one of those validators. You can see all of this at tau stats. Tau stats is run by the community. We've built a metagraph and a data analytics platform for the Bttensor network, and we're creating a lot of informational content so that folks can learn and become successful at using the Bttensor ecosystem. Subscribe to watch more videos, join our Discord if you have any questions, and we're here to help you succeed.